Her father's voice echoed through the dimly lit barn as if he were auctioning a mule instead of his daughter. His words cut through the air sharp as a whip, declaring her useless, a burden, and offering her to whoever had a coin to spare or a need to fill. She stood there in the shadows, her dress torn, dust on her cheeks, her hands trembling as the men chuckled and spat tobacco, some laughing at her shame. The night smelled of sweat, hay, and cheap whiskey. Her family, her own blood, did not even flinch when one man slapped her arm to check the flesh, as though she were cattle. They said she was too thin, too plain, too clumsy to fetch a decent marriage. They said she ate more than she was worth. Her brothers had jeered, and her mother had turned her eyes away, silent as the grave. When the bid came, it was not money but a promise from a rugged mountain man who stood apart from the crowd, arms folded, a rifle slung across his back, and eyes colder than the snows that capped the peaks behind him. "I'll take her," he said, his voice low, rough, final. "Not for what she is, but for what she might be." The crowd fell into a hush. No one dared laugh. Something about the man's stance, the way his jaw was set, the way his hand rested near his knife, told them he was not one to be mocked. Her father smirked with relief, spat on his hand, and shook the deal like he'd rid himself of a load of stones. And just like that, she was sold. She followed him because there was nothing else to do. Her family had turned their backs. She had no place in town. The world outside the fences was wild, untamed, dangerous, but so was the man who claimed her. His name was Elias Boone. Folks whispered he lived alone in the high country, where winters killed the unprepared and bears roamed like kings. Some said he had buried a wife once. Others claimed no woman had ever dared share his roof. The journey to his mountain cabin was brutal. The trail wound through jagged rocks and steep inclines, with snow still clinging to the shadows though spring had already greened the valley. She stumbled, fell, scraped her knees. He'd pulled her up each time, silent, never scolding, but never soft either. His hand was rough, his grip steady, his pace relentless. When wolves howled in the distance, he lifted his rifle and fired into the night sky, the sound echoing like thunder until even the wolves grew quiet. At last, they reached his place, a lonely cabin of logs fitted tight against the wind, smoke curling from the chimney. It stood at the edge of a clearing, surrounded by pines that whispered secrets when the wind blew hard. Inside, it smelled of pine resin, leather, and the faintest trace of something warm, like bread long gone. He gestured toward the fire, and she sank there, her body aching, her heart heavier than the mountain itself. "You're here now," he said simply, removing his coat and hanging it on a peg. "No one will call you useless again." The words hit her like a stone through glass. She wanted to believe them, but she had been broken too many times. She lowered her eyes, unsure if this was safety or another prison. Days bled into nights. He rose at dawn, split wood, hunted, and returned with game slung across his shoulders. She learned to kindle the fire, to patch his shirts, to knead bread with trembling hands. At first, he said little, his silence heavier than chains. But slowly, cracks appeared in his armor. He taught her how to hold a rifle, how to set a snare, how to read the signs of weather in the shifting clouds. He watched her stumble but never mocked her. When she succeeded, once felling a rabbit with one shot, he only nodded, but the pride in his eyes burned hotter than words. The nights were the hardest. The cabin creaked with the weight of wind, the shadows of pine branches dancing like ghosts against the walls. She lay awake, listening to his steady breathing from the other side of the room. He had built her a bed of furs, separate from his own, showing a respect she had not expected. She wondered why he had taken her, why he had stepped forward that night when her family cast her aside. She dared not ask, but one evening, as the fire cracked low and his eyes glowed amber in its light, he answered without her speaking. "Men like them down there don't see worth," he said, voice gravelly. "They only see what makes their lives easier. I see something else. You're not useless. You just never had a chance to fight for yourself." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said such things to her. Not her father, not her mother, not even the preachers who spoke of mercy. The seasons turned. Spring thawed into summer, and she walked beside him, learning to till the small patch of soil he called a garden. She gathered berries, carried water from the creek, mended fences. Her hands grew strong, her skin browned in the sun. She was no longer the frail girl trembling in the barn. She was something else now, something alive. But the past had a way of finding the lost. One day, riders came up the trail, 3 men, her brothers among them, their faces twisted with greed. They claimed they had changed their minds, that she belonged back on the farm, that Elias had stolen her. But it was not her they wanted, it was Elias's land, his supplies, the gold rumored to be hidden in the hills. Elias stood firm, his rifle in hand. She, too, stood beside him, her heart pounding. Her brothers laughed when they saw her, sneering, calling her weak, calling her a burden once more. Something inside her snapped. She lifted the rifle he had taught her to use, and with hands that no longer shook, she fired a warning shot into the dirt at their horses' feet. "Leave," she said, her voice steady, sharp. "I'm not yours. I never was." The men hesitated, caught off guard by the steel in her tone. Elias's presence, towering and silent, sealed the threat. They spat curses and turned back down the mountain trail, their defeat echoing in the clatter of hooves. When the last sound faded, she lowered the rifle, her breath shaking, her hands burning with the rush of power. Elias looked at her long, hard, as though seeing her for the first time in full. "You stood," he said quietly. "I learned from you," she whispered. That night, the air was softer, the fire warmer. He crossed the room, his steps slow, deliberate. He took her hand, rough meeting rough, and pressed it against his chest where his heart beat steady. "You're no one's burden," he murmured. "From this day, you're my wife." The words were not shouted, not dressed in vows or rings. But they were truer than any promise she had ever known. In that cabin, under the endless sky, she was claimed, not as property, not as cattle, but as a partner, an equal, a flame beside his. The mountains bore witness as years rolled forward. Together they faced storms, sickness, winters that would have swallowed weaker souls. They built more than a cabin. They built a life carved from stone and soil, from fire and trust. She bore the title of wife with pride, not because it was given, but because she had earned it. And sometimes, when the wind howled and the snow drifted high against the cabin walls, she would remember the barn, the jeers, the moment she was cast away. But now, when she looked across the fire at Elias Boone, her mountain man, her anchor, she smiled, knowing she had been sold as useless only to be found as priceless. The wilderness had taken her family's cruelty and buried it deep, replacing it with something fiercer, stronger. She was no longer the girl in the shadows. She was the woman of the mountain, wife to a man who saw her worth, and mother to the future they would carve together. And when she lay down at night, listening to the wind against the pines, she no longer feared the darkness. For the cabin was theirs, the fire was theirs, and so was the life she had fought to claim.